Welcome to another episode of the Top Lines and Tails podcast, as we reach the end, for now anyway, of our History of Native Livestock in the UK series. Once again, we'd like to thank our sponsors, Harborough, for their kind support. They are, of course, leading manufacturers of quality livestock nutrition. The Blue Faced Leicester sheep, easily distinguished by its blue colour and long neck and Roman nose, hails back to the original Leicester founded by Robert Bakewell at Dishley Grange in the mid-1700s. And this week we have to say happy birthday to the breed, for which a society was formed 60 years ago this year in 1962. And my two guests this week are both well associated with that society. James Herdman from Northumberland, who I think is 100 years centenary this year in the farm. Welcome, James. And Derek Hall from Lilyburn, Pennycook in Midlothian.
Hi.
And chaps, the breed has changed considerably from those long-wooled Leicesters, which have all but pretty much died out now. But the two main variants from those days would be, of course, the Border Leicester and the Blue Faced Leicester, and both, it has to be said, developed mainly in that area around northern England and the Scottish borders where you chaps are. And I suppose, going back to the mid-18th century, that would have been one of the most prolific areas for sheep in the UK in those borders.
I think the geography and the type of land that there is in that area, it lends itself very well to sheep production. Right, a stratified system really from the top of the hills right down to the lowlands as well. Sure,
and some diverse land, of course, it would be, as you said, with the hills there and some good lowland, and you get further east, of course, there's some damn good arable land there as well. And the breed, of course, does go back a lot earlier than 1962, obviously, and there would be some very smart men developing the genetics as far back as the late 1800s, I think. And at the time, the Border Leicester would have gained in popularity by introducing the Cheviot into their mix, but it would possibly be the hybrid of these crossed again to the Teeswater ram, which hails from south of the border there and in the Dales, that arrived eventually with what we call the Hexham Leicester, which went on to become the blue-headed Leicester, as it's better known now.
Yeah, I think that was the case, that basically they wanted to have something a bit shorter wool to put on to the Scotch Blackfaces, which Paul had quite a lot of wool at that time. Mm-hmm. And the shorter wooled sheep evolved for that purpose in the Hexham area, really, and became known as the Hexham Leicester. The big point was that by this concentrated sort of small area, the breed became very inbred and effectively fixed its genetic footprint, which has given it a tremendous benefit in the longer term because it puts hybrid vigour into the F1 cross.
We'll go in and look at that hybrid vigour in a minute or two, but I hear what you're saying, and of course the short wool breed, like the Leicester, going on to some of those longer wool, certainly the blackies that we looked at last week with wool down to the ground. And James, I believe your family have been involved in the breed, and when of course they were the Hexham Leicester and showed sheep as far back as 1914, is that right?
Yeah, well, we do have a photograph within the family of a Fiellan ram, which was obviously, I don't know if he won the show or whether he was the top price at the sale or whatever, and that it is dated 1914, and the flock that we're still working with today has, it's all stemmed down from that time period, so we've never bought any females in since then, so it still derives from those original ones from the way back then.
Wow, over 100 years. It'd be great if you could find that photograph and furnish us with that for our Facebook page.
To try and find it if I can. Yeah.
Obviously, you haven't got your hand on it right now, but would the sheep be very different back there in 1914 compared to what we see now?
I think to see the photograph, and if you said to someone, what breed of sheep is that, I think the majority of people would say it's a Blue Faced Leicester from the early days, to be fair.
Okay. Yeah. So we're saying 100 and odd years without much change there. And if we just move on, the early sales would have been at Lazenby, of course, it's in the North Pennines up there between Penrith and Carlisle. And I've been to Lazenby, and it's a lovely little village, but there's not a lot there. Why across that side? Why Lazenby? Was there any reason?
I think as time progressed, in the Hexham area where it had its strong foothold, people would start to use the Hexham Leicesters on swale dales and what have you, further across the Ulston moors there and into Cumbria. And I think that would that would be an evolution that a sale for Leicester rams would start to take place at Lazenby, and certainly late 80s and into the 90s, Lazenby was a very, very strong sale, especially the ram lamb sale. They got huge numbers there.
Certainly was a hotbed, of course. And the other sale, of course, would be Kelso. And James, I believe, again, going back there, I think your family said they topped that sale, and we can't quite remember exactly when it was that the Blue Leicesters came into Kelso. But, of course, the sale's been going since the late 1800s, I think. And the Blue Leicester would have been second fiddle to the Border Leicester back then.
That's right, yeah. It was, the Border Leicesters certainly had the lion's share of the numbers on the Leicester front, but Blue Faced Leicesters, the popularity grew and grew. 1963, I think, would be the first society sale of Leicesters, but there had been there for a considerable time before that. And in 1965, the Looker Hall flock from Northumberland, he had a consignment of 100 Blue Faced Leicester Shields at Kelso, which would be quite a sight to see. 100 off one consigner,
wouldn't it? Just and that would be, especially early days back then. Would they be a fairly uniformed affair even back then? 100 sheep, much the same.
I would imagine so. Yes. Yeah, I'm not old enough to remember that.
No, of course not.
But it would be quite a sight to see, I would imagine. I mean, even. I don't know if there's ever been a consignment of 100 rams of any breed at Kelso, to be honest.
There has in the Chevrolets, I believe, had that achievement maybe later on, but one person putting 100 tups in there, but a hell of a sight for anybody. And other sales, of course, would be Hexham, would be the main sale, obviously being the Hexham Leicester as it was, and that would be a 2-day sale, I think, that one, maybe lambs and shearlings.
They always had a sale day for shearlings, and then it was probably about a fortnight later they had a sale for ram lambs. So there was two considerable size sales there.
Two separate sales rather than two back to back. And the one that I think everybody talks about, of course, is the one in Hawes. And I think that, although that isn't a 2-day sale, I think one or two people think it might be a 2-day sale because it takes a day to get over it.
Yeah, well, it starts one day and it's usually the following day by the time it finishes. It can be 1:30 the following morning. I always remember at a council meeting, someone suggested it should be made into a 2-day sale, and someone shouted up from the back and said it already is. Derek will agree with this. The horse sale, it has a unique atmosphere of its own, really, and once it gets dark at night and what have you, just the whole atmosphere and the trade just seems to build and build. And, you quite often ask some of the consigners what time they would like to be sold in the sale, and they quite often say 9 o'clock at night.
When everybody's had a dram, maybe, and get away a little bit, loosen the bits a bit.
Well, possibly, yes. But, I mean, Derek sold at Hawes before then, what have you. I mean, you'll be able to enlighten on that side as well.
Yeah, well, the best price I got ever was 11:45 at night. So, I haven't been in the market since 6 o'clock in the morning.
That's an endurance test, that one, isn't it?
Yes, but people, it works, and there's no reason to change it, really, is there?
No.
When something not broken, why try and fix it?
Sure. And another sale, I think you mentioned to me, James, would be a sale in Scotch Gap, and a man called Thompson, who was some character by all accounts. Tell us a bit about him.
Well, Tommy Thompson, I think he'd be quite instrumental in how the breed, got spread out around the UK, really. I mean, I can remember as a very young boy, sort of early to mid 1970s, as the Mule ewe lambs trade was starting to get a hold and grow, and I can remember the Cruikshanks of Laidler Steel and the McGregor's Valensfold coming down to Scotch Gap with Mule ewe lambs, because prior to that point, a lot of people up on Scotch side were using Border Leicesters and producing the grey face, but they were producing mule lambs, and they brought them down to the sale at Scotch Gap to market them. And then as years went on, the Blue Faced Leicesters became more and more popular, and Tommy Thompson was selling Blue Faced Leicester tups at Kelso on behalf of consigners, and I think it was 1979 was the first year that a second ring of Blue Faced Leicesters was implemented due to the number of entries. It would be that from that point forward that the grey face would disappear, and the Scotch Mule would get a real hold in Scotland. But also at the same time, Tommy saw the opportunity, and there was a lot of Welshmen coming up to the Hexham area to buy Blue Faced Leicester tups to use on the Bullers and what have you. And he saw there was an opportunity there to start and market Blue Faced Leicester tups for people at the Built Wales ram sale. Okay. So he took, and then after he retired, I'm not quite sure when he retired, 1980s sometime, Laurie and Simon would sort of take over his consigners at Kelso, and Michael Walton and subsequently Andrew and Jack Walton took over his consigners and have grown the job down at Built Wales since.
Michael, of course, is a well-known auctioneer, and we'll be looking at the auctioneers in a week or two's time. But yeah, well-known auctioneer and a great face in amongst the Suffolk and the Blue Leicester breed. And if we move on, of course, we're going to mention the cross because that's probably the whole gist of this podcast, or we'll go on to that anyway. But the three-quarter bred, originally the sheep would be going back in the 1850s, I suppose, when that would be a Border Leicester on a Scottish half-bred. But the first cross ewe wouldn't really come into favour in the UK until after the Second World War. But of course, that's what we just said, is gave a massive rise to the popularity of the Blue Faced Leicester producing this mule, Derek.
The uniqueness of the genetics of Blue Faced Leicesters that gives it this tremendous boost in hybrid vigour. Really, there's no other breeds are able to put as much hybrid vigour into a cross than the Blue Faced Leicester, and that feeds down to your milkiness, your prolificacy, your longevity, your disease resistance, all the things that you want in a commercial ewe. And we've known about it for a long time, but it's not only recently that the science has come out that's sort of pointed the way as to why this is the case, and it all fits in with the line breeding way in the early days that fixed it totally different to any other breed.
Yeah,
it certainly has made the mule of any type the number one sort of cross for commercial ewe in the UK, really.
We'll look at the makeup of the mules in a second because I think it's an interesting one. But as you said, it would be the bursters of mule that would push the blue to the fore, and it became the mainstay of the industries in the British Isles. And just to clarify for me before we get on to the other types of mule, that the blue face on a Swaledale, that would be a northern mule, more your part of the world, James, and then the Scotch mule,
yes.
Scotch mule would be on a blackie. Is that right?
That's right. There's a north of England mule is what they're known as on the Swaledale. Mm-hmm. I mean, you can use a Blue Faced Leicester on any type of female, and you get a very, very basically a magical mule. That's a top-notch commercial animal.
Yeah.
With great maternal traits, and I mean, I've got to admit, I've heard of them used on a lot of different breeds of ewes, but until listening to your Suffolk podcast with Michael Weaver. That was the first time I'd heard that Blue Faced Leicester's used on Suffolks, and that's a foundation of his commercial flock.
It'd be big sheep, wouldn't they? Those would be.
Yeah.
Just clarify this, because there's also a grey face, but the grey face would be a Border Leicester on a blackie. Is that right? Another variant? Would I be?
Yes.
And we say.
And I mean, there is still a few of them in Aberdeenshire. There's still a few get sold, but largely they're dying out really. Mm-hmm. In favour of the mule,
okay,
of all sorts.
Mm-hmm. And folks from around the country would, my father included, would flock to Horse and Hexham to buy these mules in the 70s, as you said. In our case, down in the Midlands, said we were replacing the crossbred Clun, which wasn't exactly a great mother, and although I probably upset all of Wales by saying that. And all of a sudden, our lambing percentage went up by 20-30%, and the lamb's weights improved dramatically. In fact, it's a remarkable creature, isn't it, the mule, as both of you all know.
And as an arable farmer, he would judge his farm on the yield per acre, of what he produces grain-wise. I don't think there's any other breed of sheep, that can produce as many kilos of lamb per acre as what the mule does. And, that applies to all types of mules, whether it be the Teviot mule, the Scotch mule, North of England mule, Welsh mule, all of them, really.
Quite rightly, it's all about profit, isn't it? And if we go back to the Blue Face, they themselves had been developed by the certain amount of inbreeding, as you said, Derek, and studies being done, and one by Donna Berry in Ireland, and I've been in touch with him, and that shows just how extreme, how unique almost their genes really are. You had a look at this study yourself. It's quite remarkable, isn't it, Derek?
it really shows that most of the breeds in the UK are genetically fairly similar, with the exception of border Leicesters and Blue Faced Leicesters. And the bigger the difference between the two parents, the bigger the hybrid vigour will be. And we don't know for certain what the percentage is, but added all together in terms of prolificacy, milking ability, all these things, Donna Berry estimates it could be as high as a 20% boost in performance, overall performance terms. And it just underlines that's probably the reason why the Mule is so successful, because it has this extra boost, really.
Sure. For those interested in line breeding, we should call it, to be politically correct. I'll post the graph later. If you do look at that, you can see just how far away the Blue is from all the other breeds. That's sort of stuck up in one corner, so much in front of the rest. And just look at the development of the breed. And I know we're not sort of into naming flocks and things here, but who would be responsible for some of that work on the Blue Face? There are a few names that stand out. I certainly know that a name, Joe Rain. Joe used to bring Blue Leicesters down into our part of the world there, and he'd been one of the main men in the job, would he?
I think Joe was a great ambassador for the breed in the early days, probably forming the society, and the Old Parks flock really was probably the flock of the time, round about when the society was formed. They used to sell 3 consecutive days. They would sell at Hexham, and sell at Lazenby, and sell at Carlisle. It wouldn't be unknown for them to top each sale.
Yeah.
I think it's probably fair to say that, through a period of time there'll be probably very few flocks within the country which didn't have Old Parks blood used through them, really. And even nowadays, Joe's son David, he's still very much to the fore in the, he's a trustee of the association and everything, and he's still very much involved within the breed.
Certainly a great name, a name that I remember. And my father certainly would buy his blues from him, and he'd ship them down to us. And it isn't just with the Northern Hill use that we mentioned that the cross worked in harmony, but also all around the country, and which is what you were alluding to. We eventually in our part of the world switched to the Welsh Mule, which is crossed with a Beulah ewe, which is a smaller, hardier ewe, smaller ewe anyway than the sheep you guys have up there. And partly for us that was convenience for our location, but partly because they were a smaller sheep and they suited our stocking rates. But it does a job on everything, doesn't it? The Derbyshire sheep we see come in, the Dale sheep, we see it going across. There's an ex-mule mule now as well, and you mentioned the Suffolk. I mean, there's a variety of mules and all that all hold the Blue as its father, isn't there?
There is actually even Clun mules now.
Is there?
Going back to
The Cluns, the Welsh mules, they have 2 varieties where some are out of the Beulah and some are out of the Welsh Mountain type ewe, maybe an improved Welsh Mountain. So they're sort of white face, more akin to a Cheviot mule, but very, very successful down in that part of the world.
I used to lamb 1,000 hogs every year at Welsh mules. The first time lammers, it was quite a task for a young boy, but they generally could look after the lambs once you got them acclimatized to it. And generally, the breed, both in its pure and cross format, are easier kept. In fact, the Blue was once denoted as a woman's breed, which will get the phones ringing immediately nowadays. But is that because the temperament, would that be, James?
Well, they're very maternal, and they're a good sheep to work with, to be honest. There are some people who've always said, that they don't like to live very well, but that's totally untrue, I would say. I think it all depends on how you're going to look after them at the end of the day. I can always remember a shearing contractor telling me we could never understand why this particular buyer of Blue Faced Leicester rams bought so many every year. And the shearing contractor told me when he went to shear them, the ram harnesses were still on them from the previous tuppence season, and they used to say to him, "Do you want me to put them back on once I've sheared the sheep?" And I think, if you look after them, they'll look after you.
Work the sheep the whole year round. They certainly did have a bit of a reputation in the early days, maybe because a little bit of too much inbreeding for being not quite so hardy. But that's all changed now, I'm sure.
No, there's a lot of rams, which live and work till 6-7 years nowadays. We've had several of those, and they've done really well.
And the breed, of course, would have increased in size, I'm sure, from when your family were showing them back in the 1920s. But the breed would increase in size to possibly maybe the biggest breed in the UK now. Would they be in height anyway? And for our listener, what sort of height are we looking at? What sort of weight are we looking at? Mature rams.
Mature rams could be, I would think, 140 kilos height. If you held their head up, you must be almost touching 4 feet, some of the tallest ones, if they're to the top of their head. Would you say?
Yes, I would agree with that. I think it sales as well, the presentation of sheep, that sheep are definitely a lot bigger nowadays. And I would say probably in the current time, there's a bigger percentage are sold as ram lambs nowadays rather than shearling rams. And there are really some big lambs out there which are sold. But again, they'll only grow to their genetic potential, won't they?
Yeah.
They won't. And I think as well, a lot of shearlings which are sold, that a lot of them are what I would term progeny tested. They've been tried as ram lambs, and you can recommend how they're going to breed to potential purchasers. And there's not many other breeds can say that they're selling progeny tested shearling rams. In the second year of their life.
Sure. Nothing like it. If you can buy a sheep that's proven, then you're halfway there, aren't you? And
that's right.
Looking back to the times, of course, we had the sad time at the turn of this millennium with a foot and mouth, and that would have hit the breed very hard, I think. And then we've had scrapey genotyping and various things. But I mean, the foot and mouth would have been the one that would have done a lot of damage to the genetics, I guess.
It did, yes. There would be a lot of long-established flocks were taken out with foot and mouth. Not all of them would get started again, but some would be very fortunate and be able to locate bloodlines that people had bought from them and try and buy some of those bloodlines back to get established again. And some people within a very short time got back to where they had been prior to foot and mouth.
And the genotyping, the scrapey genotyping, did that have a hit? There might be probably not so much in the commercial world as it did in the pedigree world when everybody's looking to try and breed that out.
Well, I know one notable sire that we had quite a big impact in the breed was a 3, and I always felt that we didn't sell as much or high prices off him as we would have in other times. So there was this element of 1, 2, 3s, which and then that may return if we have to go to export sheep to Ireland. We'll have to get them into ones.
Yeah. Backfired a little bit now, but it was a tough time, wasn't it? Where I know in a lot of breeds the baby went out with the bathwater when they're killing everything that wasn't a one, and then they're all breeding for ones that maybe weren't good enough sheep. So it takes a while to sit and analyse this from a distance and breed it out slowly. And I assume everything's back up, as you said, now for export. Now we're all trying to get the ones. I assume there's plenty of ones about now.
It's probably something we've not done a lot of in the recent times up until the last couple of years. It's rekindled enthusiasm for the scrapey genotyping.
Got to blame a bit of that on the Brexit as well. Maybe a good thing or a bad thing. Where I sit here in southwest France, and I'm trying to get sheep over at the moment, and we've got to get everything genotyped. And of course, a lot of these breeds going back the way they've got no records whatsoever. Anyway, let's move away from that one. Going back to when we were buying mules, anyway, it would be the darker faced ones that were more sought after in the Welsh case, anyway, because it would distinguish them from in our case, from the white Welsh Hilly, which wasn't as big an animal, I suppose, as the Beulah would be, and so the darker faced ones used to make 10 or 15% more money, and I think that would be the same to be said in the Mule as well, certainly originally.
Yes, and at the end of the day, I think you're absolutely correct. The darker ones are distinguished. They are a mule. There is no doubt about it. And there's lots of competitors who would love to have their sheep called mule type, but darker ones, there's nothing can look like a darker mule. It's just known as a mule, and everybody goes for that.
And guessing, I suppose, this is looking for those darker faces, looking then for a Blue Leicester sire with darker colours to put that into there, and that maybe gave rise to tups develop purely for that purpose, for the crossing type tup.
Yes, I think that's how the whole thing evolved, really. The two types within the breed, they've all got an end market for what they're producing, and the people who are using the crossing type on horned sheep, it's leaving the darker faces, which, as you've already said, the markup in price on them, on that particular type. But at the same time, totally understand why, for production of the Cheviot Mule, which is basically taken over from the half-bred big style, that, they're producing a white-faced sheep, but they're equally doing just as good a job.
Okay. I think both of you bred the traditional type blues before sort of moving on to the crossing side of it. And Derek, going back the way a few decades, I think you won the Highland Show with a top first Jasper in 1995. But
yeah, I think that was probably the time that we felt our mules weren't good enough. And as James said, a lot, particularly selling at Kelso, we're progeny testing the Thompson. We have to be really customer focused, and so at that time we felt, we need to get our mules better because that's going to help our Blue Faced Leicester trade, and that was why we made the switch. And we don't regret it, as James said, that if people are breeding Cheviot mules, then they look for a different type of Blue Faced Leicester, equally successful. But probably, I think, as James said, we're probably one of the most customer focused breeds. There is, because I don't know of any other breed that you can turn up and they'll say, yes, that'll breed you good mules, that'll not breed you good mules. And I think the honesty of the breeders is tremendous. People are fairly honest about how they're bred, good or bad. And because at the end of the day, we want people to come back. And so if you tell them what it's going to do and it does it, then they're going to be satisfied.
That's great marketing, isn't it, when the repeat business comes back? And James, yourself, you bred traditional types too, but not for quite a long while, but we need to make sure we give that side of the breed a mention. And there's still to the fore, aren't there, the traditional side, and some great enthusiasts amongst them there. Would there be any numbers? So do many people breed both of them? I suppose that's something I'd ask.
I can think of, I think the Alwynton flock, they still have 2 flocks within their farm and enterprise, but I can't think of many others nowadays that have both types.
Mervyn Roberts would be the only other one, I think.
Oh, yes, from Wales, yes.
Okay. To our listener, of course, you are the Blue Leicester are all under one society and a close-knit outfit that you are. And I need to mention Fiona Sloan, who sent me quite a little bit of information. Now, Fletcher, of course, she gave me she did a lot of promotion work on the breed, and now you've got Helen Carr on the roll. But you haven't had many changes of staff at the top since in the last 60 years, have you?
Well, since the society was formed in 1963, Helen is only our 6th secretary. Right. So we must be a pretty decent bunch of members to work with, I would say, because we certainly haven't had a big turnover of secretaries, that's for sure.
I won't mention that some of the cattle breeds moving swiftly on, and there would be sales now, of course, right across the country, weren't there? Most of the breeding tups would be lambs, as you said, but yeah, there's society sales down in the south and in Wales and various things. They don't all have to traipse up to Scotland and North England to buy them these days, do they?
Even Southern Ireland now has a sale, and there's numerous sales in Northern Ireland. There's a club down in Devon. They have a sale at Tavistock. So it is the length and breadth of the UK. And as I've said earlier, it's really there to suit all the different types of sheep.
Sure.
Because the blues get used in so many different types and geographically different types that they have a sale in the locality.
I commentated this year at the Royal Highland Show on the classes. Rodney Blackwell made a tremendous job of judging there, and I think there was 1 or 2 main people, Low Arkland and McClymonds at Kirkland, picking up the tickets between them. But there's a lot of people at the top of the breed, far too many to mention in that trad side, isn't it, to go through them all without upsetting anybody. But the traditional ones are very enthusiastic about that side of the breed, aren't they?
I think both types are, full of enthusiastic members and supporters. And, you go to think back to the Highland Show, in recent years there's a huge crowd around the judging ring of both types, and the members of both types, they mix and socialise with each other just as well as anyone, really.
Brilliant.
The breed is actually, since the 2 sections are getting shown in different classes, the breed is more unified because the breeders, the best traditional blues are coming to the top and the best crossing ones are coming to the top, whereas in the past where they were mixed, there was a lot of animosity about who was judging and whatnot. So splitting the sections has been one of the best things that's happened.
I was going to mention that because both of you will be judges, of course, and just what it was the split in the two breeds, because you couldn't. I mean, it's very difficult, as we've talked in other breeds on these podcasts. It's very difficult to judge 2 or 3 different types of sheep in the same ring with one judge who will favour one side. So when did they split those? When did they split the judging away from each other?
It's probably been within the last 10 years or so, I would say, really. That a lot of the sales, they evolved themselves, horses, it's all crossing type sheep. The Carlisle sale, they've actually in recent years split the 2 rings so that they've got one ring going at the same time with traditional type and the other ring with crossing type. And again, it works very well. There's very good prices with both types of sheep. Mm-hmm. One of the slogans that is used on the society stand at various shows and sheep events is "diversity is our strength," and I think it's only 4 words, but it's very, very true.
True. Okay. Yeah, that's diversity. Of course, is exactly where you are with 2 different types, and we mentioned the sales, and of course, there's female sales now as well. Some of the females are in demand, obviously, and some big prices we're seeing recently. It's January, I think, your in-lamb sale, but that's going a bomb, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And again, in recent years, that's another aspect that's taken off within the breed, that female sales have, they're flying nowadays, and, people target consignments of sheep towards those female sales on an annual basis nowadays.
Something that crops up regularly when we chat about these things, of course, is the flushing, or the element of just be able to spread the genes wider. Would some people be targeting those sales, paying a big price for 1 or 2, and then using flushing to spread those genes evenly? Is a lot of that being done now in the breed?
There's a fair bit of embryo transfer done, I think. We reckon about 10% of the lambs born are embryo transfer. Okay. So there's a fair bit of that getting done, particularly in some of the bigger flocks. So larger number of lambs on the ground. They might not have the most Blue Faced Leicester used, but they have the most Blue Faced Leicester lambs getting registered.
10% would certainly be lower than the Texel breed. and Derek, you've worked quite closely with the Mule group. I think the Scotch Mule breed was within the society, perhaps?
So I suppose the background to that was that we felt that the best way to promote Blue Faced Leicesters was to promote mules. Mm-hmm. So I'm chairman of the Mule group, which is a group that have come together from all the North England mules, Highland mules, Scotch mules, and Welsh mules, and if the TV mules form an association, they'll come in as well. And what we're doing is we're trying to promote just the message about the mules, because largely the hybrid vigour story has been it's old news, and I think that what Donna Berry did gave us fresh impetus that this is a story that's worth revisiting. Okay. And so that's really what we've tried to push hard through the Mule group. Okay.
And going on to the crossing type, and of course for those aren't aware, they tend to have a darker, patchier face, which of course signifies those darker mules. And I'm going to ask this because my listener will ask me, was something being bred back into those just to try and achieve that bit more darkness? Is there a snitch or something else coming in there, or is it just natural selection?
I think it would be natural selection. I think, years ago there would be a breeder that would, again, he would coming back to the progeny test, and he would use a ram and really like the dark-faced mules at left, and he would use it over his own ewes, and, there would be more and more colour appear in them. And for a while, a lot of breeders would, they were trying to buy the colour as much as possible. Uh-huh. But fashions within a breed change and evolve all the time. Mm-hmm. But I think, from outsiders, the difference in the types within the Leicester breed is it's distinguished by the colour. Yeah. And it's easier to see by people. I mean, just to use the Texels as an example, the Ram Lamb market at the Lanark sales and what have you, it's catering for a different market to what the commercial shearlings are at Kelso. True. In the Texel breed. So it's there and it's present in every breed, really, the different types and that. But I think it's a lot more easily distinguished in the Leicesters because of the involvement of the colour.
Would I be right in thinking the crossing breed sheep would be a bit bigger, or is that just a myth?
No. There was a long project done away back in 1997 at Aberystwyth, and they actually did look at mature size and whatnot, and and confirmation and whatnot. And one of the findings, strangely, was that the brown-faced mules at that time were sort of bigger and squarer. And, I think it was probably a surprise. There's maybe not the difference now, but at that time, in 97, Aberystwyth did a lot of work on it, and then I think it did sort of indicate that there was a slight difference, but that might have changed now.
Certainly, Dewey Jones will be involved in that, and they did do a lot of work there, in a lot of breeds, and looking at the crossing breed, we see quite a few serious names, what I would call serious names, in amongst the blackie breeders, the likes of Midlock, Allenfold that you mentioned, Nunsklugt, these sort of guys, and they're majoring very much in the crossing side of it now, and the prices are starting to get very serious, aren't they? And there's a few tops now notching up their £20,000-30,000 mark, James.
Yes, well, at Hall's sale last September there, the breed record was broken twice within the same sale. Prior to that, it had been 37,000 for a Midlock Ram Lamb from about 3 or 4 years ago, and they broke the record at 40,000. But then later in the sale, the Riddens flock run by the Porter family, they smashed that and sold the one at 65,000. I think that's something nowadays as well, probably on the back of AI and flushing. That years ago people bought their own stock ram outright, but nowadays, with the influence of AI and flushing, syndicates get together to buy these better rams, and that's driven the top end of the prices with them. If you get 2 or 3 syndicates going on the same sheep, it can make them a lot dearer.
Certainly, something was discussed last week in the blackie breed, and as I said, nobody goes there to try and spend a lot of money, but sometimes you've got to get your guys together to get what you want. And as I said, I commentated on the sheep at the Royal Highland Showcase this year, and in the crossing ring there was a lamb from Andrew McQuiston that literally took my eye as soon as it came in the ring. A real show beast, I think, and I think she went on to win the interbreed. They're striking. They're an eye-catching breed, aren't they, these crosses?
It was a first-class animal, really, and Andrew's always had a lot of good clashing females. He's got a really good line. And I think the good thing of that is that it shows that Blue Faced Leicesters are a serious contender in the sheep industry now. I think 10 years ago you wouldn't have expected a Blue Faced Leicester to be competing in an interbreed or having a chance of winning an interbreed, and now it's fairly common, and partly because of the size and scale that you talked about. A big ram or something is quite an impressive animal when it's standing in an interbreed ring.
She was winning it by a country mile, if you ask me, but I wasn't the judge. But I think he agreed with me on that one. And we mentioned Wales earlier on, and a name I will mention we used to buy our tups from is Richard Thomas at the Tanhouse, and we buy tups off his father, of course, going back the way, and a great family, a great stalwart for the breed down there. And I think there's a bit of blood in your flock, Derek, isn't there, with a B4 ram?
Yeah, we used B4 for quite a number of years, very successful, and actually, I was speaking to Alan White, who we shared the tup with, and he said he had 4 lambs born to B4 this time again. Okay. So that's quite old semen. So he was certainly a first-class animal. It was just absolutely solid. And he had a great impact in the flock.
I know we can't mention all the sheep in this breed. Are there a few others that in amongst the breed that have made their mark, or is it just generally different sheep for different people?
Probably different sheep for different people. There's some that maybe have stood out up in the north here where we're crossing in blackies, and it's maybe slightly different in the south crossing in swales. So
yes, I think it's. I mean, even when we talk about syndicates getting together, you quite often see a tup bought by 2 or 3 people. He might really click with one flock's females and doesn't do quite so well with the other ones. But that's just the makeup of the genetic footprint of everybody's flocks being slightly different, and how they all just knit together or don't knit.
James, you've been involved in the society, of course, for a long time.
I've been on the council since it was set up. It was changed from basically a committee to the council. I think that was in the early 1990s, and I've served on the North East region and the National Council since then, and I did do a spell as I was actually North East chairman during foot and mouth time, which was quite difficult trying to coordinate how we were going to work sales or potential sales.
Sure. And Derek, you too have been involved heavily with the society.
Same as James, chairman of the Scottish region. I've been on council for quite a long time. Not as long as James, but...
And you chaps being involved in the society, which side of the breed would be more vibrant these days? Would that be a fair question? Is there what a lean towards one side or the other, or are we 50-50 down the middle?
I think we're all one breed, and everyone works together. You know, the council has a good cross-section of traditional type breeders and crossing type breeders, and we all reach amicable decisions and what have you within council, I would say.
And numbers-wise within the breed, sheep-wise?
I think there's probably slightly more crossing type sheep, maybe, would you say 60% to 40%?
It's not something you could actually split out on a database, but if you look at the numbers that are sold, you're probably a bit right, James, I would think.
Okay. Not meant to be a loaded question. It was just sort of a question that I know our listeners out with the breed would be looking at. And
I suppose if you linked it back into the mule numbers, the North England mule is the most numerous sheep in the UK.
Is it?
12 million. Mm-hmm. And then I think if you look at Cheviots and Welsh mules, I'm guessing they're maybe about, added together, maybe about another 5 million. So that, it's heavily weighted in favour of the North England mule. Sure. So that it's hard to actually put a figure on it, but it possibly indicates it might be nearer to 70-30.
Okay, that makes sense when we're all out to breed those mules, and that is not only the most numerous, that probably makes up close under half of the population of the sheep in the country. And I mentioned at the beginning of this piece there that you guys have got a celebratory birthday this year. Congratulations! And what plans are there so our listeners can maybe join in? Are you going to have a few parties and shindigs and maybe a bit of a soiree at the Highland Show or something?
Well, we'll always have a party at the Highland Show.
Yes. It'd be good to see you there this year, Andy, if you're at the Highland Show.
I will, thank you. Yeah, it's great of it.
Yeah, 5:00 on the Friday night. Yeah.
Okay.
I think they're still making other plans. They're looking to try and maybe have something in the back end, but it's very difficult. It's still in certain times. Sure. I've got COVID right here now. I'm tested positive, so we still don't really. We're not totally out of the weeds really, and I think it's maybe quite difficult to plan these things. Just don't want to go hell for leather on a big event, and it could.
Sure. Well,
might not happen.
I'm sorry to drag you from your bed there with COVID, and especially if you're in the middle of lambing, that's no fun having that. Just shows, as you said, that we're not.
No, I managed to get the lambing finished before I got it.
Okay, fair enough. And hearing what you're saying, of course, it's great to see that we will have shows back this year, and we're not guaranteed them as yet, but hopefully we'll all get out to see some normality back in the UK with regards to certainly the main shows, and a lot of other shows now all coming on board. And the Yorkshire show, of course, will be a big show for you guys as well, I guess. And I better let you both get back to your lambing. I've really appreciated hearing a history of this breed. And hearing what a phenomenal breed they are, and as you said, diversity is the strength, but this hybrid vigour, it's pretty obvious when you look at a sheep that it's by a Blue Leicester. You can run, but you can't hide, can't you?
Yeah. Definitely, yes. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, James, for your time. I'll let you get back to finish lambing your blues, but let you get back to lambing your other ones. Yeah,
thanks very much. I enjoyed doing it,
and Derek, the same to you. You're coming into lambing now. Thanks very much for your time.
No, thank you very much. I've enjoyed it. Yeah.
Okay.
Very good.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for listening to this week's Top Lines and Tails podcast. As always, we'd like to kindly thank our sponsors, Harborough, for their continued support, and they are, of course, manufacturers and suppliers of quality livestock nutrition and nutritional advice. Visit their webpage or see them on Facebook and social media for other information. And whilst on the subject of Facebook, why not visit our Top Lines and Tails Facebook page, where you should find photographs and other information about this podcast and other podcasts previously.